Welcome. So this week, what we're going over is color management. So go ahead and open up the Lesson 8 folder and then open this start file. And just update modified links. And this is what the project should look like. When you open it up, it'll probably be set to preview mode. Go ahead and just change that to normal. That way you can see everything that we're working on properly. Now, understanding color management is very important because colors can vary from medium to medium. What that means is a color displayed on your laptop might not display it the same way on your cell phone because of how the monitor is calibrated or some settings you might have turned on each device. And then if you were to print it out, it could look completely different again because of how the printer mixes the inks or just how the device manages the colors. So it's important to understand when you start off a project where it's going to live, because each particular device or printing method has its own gamut. Now, a gamut is the color rendering abilities of the specific output of the device. You can also call this the spectrum or the range of the available colors. Okay, now even though we can't always see it unless we're in like our color mixer, each color has a set of numbers attached to it. These numbers act as the recipe and they tell the devices what it needs to mix in order to simulate the correct color. So the two main methods that are used are CMYK and RGB. CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, and key. Key usually is black, and then RGB is red, green, blue. CMYK usually has a wider range because you're mixing 4 colors together instead of just 3. If you're working with a monitor, so something like a laptop, a TV, or a cell phone, it's going to be using RGB. So if you are making a project that's going to live on those screens, like say a internet ad, or if you're designing a website, or if you're just designing a poster that's going to be displayed on a TV monitor, then you should use the RGB color mode because that's what those screens are designed to display. If you were to use a CMY color range, it wouldn't work as well because even though it has the recipe for mixing those colors together, it's set to mix red, green, and blue together. So it's going to limit your range on what CMY colors you can use. Now in InDesign, you can actually specify what you want your color settings to be by going to Edit and Color Settings. And if you were to make changes in here, it changes it for the program. So every new document you make will use these settings as a default. And you can kind of see that as I hover over some of these headings, you'll see down in the description, it changes depending on what I have hovered over. And it kind of gives you a description of what each one does. So you can kind of look through the different settings to kind of see what your options are. I'm not going to make any changes in here. I'm just going to hit cancel and just keep them as is. Now, a step that should always be part of your design process is proofing. You've most likely heard this term through your teachers telling you to proofread your essays, proofread your articles, things like that. You do want to do that on your project. Make sure there aren't any misspellings and that you have everything laid out the way you're supposed to. But there are 2 other kinds of proofings. One is a print proof. You will do this, or your client will do this, if you plan on printing the project out. You can usually ask the printer you're working with if they can give you a print proof, or if you actually own the device, you can just do the proof yourself. Basically what this is it's just a test copy to make sure that the printer can simulate the colors as you intend them to be, and also it's a good way to double check that none of your text or important imagery or information is going to get cut off by the trim, or if you're doing something like a booklet, none of the words or images are going to get too close to the bend towards the spine. So if you're going to print something out, try and see if you can do a test print so that way you can see how everything's going to turn out and you can make sure that it's going to look the way you want it to. Another kind of proofing is called soft proofing. Soft proofing is a method to proof your colors on screen. It's not always perfect, depending on how your screen or your monitor is calibrated, but it usually gives you a good idea of what your colors are going to turn out to be. And in InDesign, you can actually simulate some different methods to see how your colors will come out under certain conditions. So you can soft proof your colors in InDesign by going to View and Proof Colors. So you can see underneath Proof Setup, you can do Proof Colors. And right now it's just giving us a proof of the current settings we have set up. So if you want to change those settings, you can go back to View, Proof Setup. And right now it's simulating what the document should look like if we're printing CMYK on normal coated paper. Most like printer paper is coated, especially if you are working with like a glossy paper. Uncoated paper is closer in texture to like say a newspaper. So like even printer paper, even though it doesn't look that fancy, it is usually coated. But let's say we wanted to go for different settings. So we can go to Custom. And I'm just going to move this out of the way so I can see a bit better about what's going to happen. So where it says Device to Simulate, that's where you can pick the conditions that you want to simulate so you can do a soft proof of what your project will look like. Again, it's not 100% perfect, but InDesign usually does a pretty good job. Just to show what I'm talking about, go ahead and scroll down to dot gain 20%. And we shouldn't have to click anything else, but we're just going to do dot gain 20%. I'm going to hit OK. You'll notice it changes it to grayscale. So this is good if you are working on a very limited budget and you know that when it's going to be printed, it's going to be grayscale. You can check and make sure that your images aren't going to get washed out and you've still got a good contrast between some of your colors and your text. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn all this off. So I'm going to go back to View and turn off Proof Colors. Next up is defining print requirements. Before you start a project, you should either think about or you should ask the client what the intended delivery method is. Is this something that's going to live online or is it going to get printed out? This is important to know right off the bat because one, it affects your color profiles. If you are working with something that's going to be on a monitor for its entire life, then you need to set it to RGB because that is what monitors can display. If it's going to be printed, you need to know that because one, you need to set up the correct color profile, but also you need to know what the printer's requirements are. And I'm not necessarily talking about the printer as in the actual mechanical device. I'm talking about if this is like a high volume project, there's probably going to be a printer shop involved. So you need to know what that professional or what that store's requirements are for documents, especially for your particular projects. They need to know specific information for if you're going to have a bleed on it, how things are going to be trimmed, if you want special varnishes on it. They need to have certain information displayed or attached to the file so that way when they run it through their equipment, it'll turn out the way you want it to. If I'm working with a client, I usually have them deal with the printer because one, I don't have the equipment to do it on my end. And two, since they're going to be the one paying the printing costs, I want them to be working with someone who they're comfortable with and is in their price range. Because if this is something they're going to be printing off over and over again, they won't always want to go through me every time they need to print it off. They will just go directly to whoever is printing it for them. Now, once you have a printer chosen, you need to know what their requirements or terms are. Now, when I say printer in this case, I'm not necessarily talking about the specific device. It is important to know how your device works, but when I say printer in this case, I mean the actual professional that's going to be taking your file and putting it into the machine. Because depending on what your project is, how it's supposed to look, and how that particular printer works, or how their process works, they're going to need specific information attached to the document. So sometimes they'll have to have trim marks, they'll have to have registration marks. It really just depends on what that printer wants and what you are wanting to do with your project. So make sure that your client is either asking the printer the right questions, or if this is all way over the client's head, you can just ask the client, what print shop are you going through and if they're working with anyone specific, and then you can just get in contact with those people on your own and get the requirements directly from them, so that way you can make sure that you have all the specific requirements. Just make sure that you also relay that information onto your client, especially if it involves extra costs. We'll go into this more in a little bit, but like some varnishes and some colors can cost extra, or depending on how the project needs to be set up, that can incur extra costs. So you need to make sure that your client is aware of everything that could affect their bill at the end of the day. Another reason you may want to speak with a printer, even if you're not working with a client and this is your own personal project or something for your brand that you're going to be printing out. If you're working through a print shop, you should still talk to them, because one, you still need those requirements, and two, they can sometimes give you some tips about how to save time in your design or how to save money. Their wheelhouse is printing things, so they know how certain products will turn out and how to get some really cool effects. Now, once you have those requirements, you can work on your project, but in InDesign, you can actually load up a Preflight Profile. So once you have those requirements, you can start working on the project. Something nice about InDesign is you can take those requirements and input them into a Preflight profile. So that way InDesign itself can double check your project and make sure as you're working on it, it complies with what you're supposed to give to the printer. So in case you forgot, if you go down to the bottom here where it says no errors, that's part of your Preflight. If I double click on where it says no errors, it brings up this menu here. And this can list things like if you have an overset error somewhere, or if there is a link missing for a photo file, or if you've uploaded a custom Preflight profile, it can flag any specific requirements that you need but don't have included. Like if the printer needs CMYK and you have some colors that are set to RGB, Preflight will catch that and you can go ahead and make those adjustments before you send it off to the printer. It can also check things like the document size, fonts, colors, images, bleeds, all that. So in the Lesson 8 folder, there's actually a Preflight profile included in it, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So if we go to Window, Output, Preflight, it brings up this window. That's another way to get to it. But then we're going to go up to the menu button, in which are these lines stacked on top of each other. And then I'm going to go to Define Profiles. And you can see it should have the basic one in there, but you might also have some other ones. So like there's one for digital publishing in here. But I'm going to go ahead and go down to this menu button that's right here. It's next to the plus and minus sign. Go ahead and hit those three lines stacked on top of each other. And we're going to go to Load Profile. And there should be a IDPP file in there called Add Profile. I'm going to select that and just hit open. And you'll see it adds a new profile for us. You can also just create a whole new blank one by hitting that plus sign, or you can delete one hitting that minus sign. And you can see in this particular profile, the main things that we are focusing on are links and color. And you can actually click on this little triangle to get more options. And you can see if they basically have everything selected for this particular profile. And it's going to check all these things in Preflight to make sure that we have them set up correctly. And it will let us know by changing this to a red dot and telling us how many errors we have. So we can just go back to our Preflight, find where all the errors are, and then make changes accordingly. To be more specific, one thing is if we go to color spaces and modes that are not allowed is RGB. So any instances where a color is using RGB will get flagged, because if you're sending it off to the printer, you don't want that printer to make an approximation that throws off your color palette. So once you have that profile loaded in there, just hit OK. I'm going to go back up to my Preflight panel. If you've closed this, you can either just click down here where it says no errors, or go to Window, Output, Preflight. And where it says Profile, we're going to hit that drop down and change that to Add Profile. You can see right off the bat, it gives us 10 errors. So I'm just going to click that little triangle here. And I'm going to go to the section that says Color Space Not Allowed. Now the things that it is flagging are Align and our JPEGs, which are the photos here. Now I'm not going to concern myself too much with the photos because these aren't brand specific images, and it's okay if the colors are a little bit off. What I am concerned with is this line, and if you double click on the object here, you'll notice that it selects it. It might be hard to see, especially in this case, because it's so thin, but it is selected because we can see a bit of the bounding box off to the side there. And if you want more information about what exactly the issue is, if you go back to Preflight, there is a little section here called Info. You can hit that triangle and you can get more information as to why it's flagging that particular object. So first thing we need to do is convert the color mode for a swatch. So I'm going to go to Window, Color, and Swatches. And I'll bring this up. I'm going to go ahead and drag it out here so I can see the menu a little bit better. And I'm going to go to Green Dark and I'm going to double click on it. And it should bring up my swatch options. Now you can see if we go to color mode, it's set to RGB. I'm going to go ahead and change that to CMYK. And then I'm going to hit OK. And you'll notice that our error for the line goes away now. So using your Preflight is a good way to proof your document to make sure that there aren't any errors that you can catch on your end. And then when it's getting ready to get printed, either have your client ask, or you can ask for it yourself, see if it's possible to get a test print done, so that way you can check the colors are coming out correctly. Also, if you've ever sent off an email or sent something off to the printer, every time you hit the print button, you'll catch a mistake that you didn't catch from the hour of editing you'd done previously. So sometimes just having it printed out and as a different medium in front of you makes it easier to catch errors. You don't want to go straight into printing 50 copies of something and find out that the colors are displayed wrong, or the ink is too thick for the paper, or that you've spelt allegory wrong. So just kind of make sure before you spend a lot of time and money into printing off copies that you've tested it to make sure it works the way you are intending to. So I'm going to go ahead and close Preflight for right now. Now InDesign has multiple ways to create colors. InDesign can make both process colors and spot colors. Process colors are probably more what you're used to, where you go into the color picker and you change these sliders, or you go in here and you pick the color you want, and it has all these numbers off to the side. That's what a process color is. The printer will have these colors installed and it will mix them together to get what you're wanting. So a process color is like RGB and CMYK. A spot color is a pre-mixed ink with a specific finish that's offered usually by either the printer itself or by an outside company. That's what Pantone is. Pantone has a range of colors that it offers in different finishes. So like you can get a nice burgundy color and you can either get it in a matte finish, or you can get it in like super glossy, or you can get it in normal glossy, or if you want a nice foil, you can get that as well. So spot colors are good if you need a specific finish, or if you need a very specific color and you need it to be accurate every single time. A lot of things that are brand related, like logo colors, those are usually going to be spot colors because they want those to be the same no matter what. Now, something to keep in mind is that spot colors, if you're working with a printing press, they usually need their own plate for each color. So most printers will usually have 2 to 3 spots available to you included in the price, but every spot after that is going to cost you extra. So that's why you want to use spot colors sparingly. You don't want to have a whole bunch of them because that just skyrockets your price. Most documents have a mix of both process and spot color. The spot color again is used for brand related things like a logo color. And then you use process colors for things like images or just like background decoration graphics. If you plan on using a spot color, make sure the printer is aware of that. That way they can tell you if they have that particular spot color available, or they can give you a color guide of what they have available and how you can mix them together to get different effects. So in this document we have here, we're going to use a couple different methods to create colors. So make sure you don't have anything selected. Just click out on your pasteboard here. And I'm going to go over to my swatches. If you don't have this off to your right, just go to Window, Color, Swatches. And we're going to go to this menu button in the swatches, which is those lines stacked on top of each other. And we're going to go to New Color Swatch. Now the default that it's set to is probably going to be Process. We're going to change that to Spot. And then in color mode, we're going to hit that drop down and you'll see there are all these different spot brands that we can pick from. We just want Pantone Solid Coated. And then we want 266. So you should see it if you typed in this text box. Should be that. Should automatically highlight it as Pantone 266C. Make sure you have Add to CC Library turned off, so make sure there's not a check mark there. If you're going to use a color repeatedly across multiple projects, you might want to upload it to your library. That way it's easier to grab. But we aren't going to be concerned about that right now. I'm just going to select this Pantone and hit OK. And you'll see it adds it to our swatch panel here. And you'll notice that there are these little symbols next to each color. On the spot color, you can see that first symbol there is a rectangle with a hole in it. That is the symbol for a spot color. These ones here where it's kind of filled in with a texture or a pattern, that is telling us it's a process color. So if you use spot colors regularly, or if you're going to use a spot color for a specific project and it's going to be printed, it's a good idea to get a color guide. Pantone has a color guide you can get, and when I say color guide, I mean a printed color guide. That way you can actually see how it's going to turn out. If you are working with like a Riso printer, they usually have a color guide that you can look at, and you can see what effect different color combinations get. So if it's going to be printed, make sure that you ask for a color guide if you are going to be using spot colors. If you're going to be using process colors, you don't necessarily need to ask for one of those. That's what your test copy or your proof print will tell you. Okay, next up is we are going to create our own CMYK color swatch. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my color panel. I'm just going to switch it to CMYK. And if you don't see it off to the right, you can always just go to Window, Color, and Color. But I want to pick a color that's similar to this photo down here. Now, rather than trying to eyeball it, I'm just going to zoom in. Then I'm going to grab my Eyedropper tool. You can hit I on your keyboard as the shortcut, or if you go down to your left, it should be the tool above your hand tool. If you don't immediately see it, look for either the color theme tool or the measure tool and just right click, and the eyedropper should be there. So grab your eyedropper and kind of pick a color around there. And you can see if you watched your color panel, it changed the color up here to match what we picked up. Now, because this image is RGB, it switched our color sliders to RGB as well. That's okay, we can change that. I'm gonna go ahead and say that's close enough. And I'm going to go back up to this menu button, and I'm going to hit add to swatches. And if I go to my swatches, you'll see it's down at the very bottom here. Now I'm just going to double click on it, and I'm going to change the color mode to CMYK, and I'm going to put in some slightly more specific numbers here so that way I can get accurate on the project. So cyan's going to be 10, magenta is going to be 0, yellow is going to be 40, and then black is 0. And then I'm just going to hit OK, and I'm happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and add another color, and I'm just going to go down to this new swatch button. Now if you hit that, it should just duplicate the one you already had selected. I'm going to double click on it again, and I'm going to change the values. It's going to be 25, 75, and 0, 0. And it should give you this purplish pink color, and just hit OK. Now if you're going to be making a bunch of different colors, hitting the new button and then double clicking can be a bit tedious. A shortcut to get to that swatch options menu when you make a color is hold down either the Alt or Option key on your keyboard and then hit the new button, and it should bring up the color swatch menu automatically. So this next one is going to be 90, 70, 30, and 10. And it should give you kind of this navy blue color. And I'll hit OK. Again, to get directly to the new swatches menu, when you hit the button, is you just hold Alt or Option on your keyboard. Another way you can make a new color is just by going up to this menu button and just hitting new color swatch, and it'll bring you straight to this option menu right away. So this one is going to be 65, 25, 100, and then 0. And this should give you a nice vibrant green. And just hit OK. Okay, now I'm just going to zoom back out, and we're going to go ahead and practice applying our colors. So I'm just going to grab my selection tool, and there is a frame that is covering this whole entire page. I'm just going to click on that, and there are two ways to change the color. If you have your swatches panel open, you can change it in here, or if you go up to the control panel, this top square is your fill, that's why it's a solid square, and then this bottom square, the one with a hole in it, controls your stroke, which is the outline of a shape. We are going to go ahead and change the fill on it, and we are going to fill it with that green color that we just made, the 65, 25, 100 one. But this green is really bright, so I'm going to go up to Tint, and I'm going to go ahead and type 50 into there, and what that will do is it doesn't make it any more transparent, but it kind of washes the color out. If you're familiar with traditional artwork, a tint of a color is the color plus white. So that's what happens when you change the tint of something in InDesign, is making it a lighter version of itself. Next is I'm going to go down and select the frame that has Urban Oasis Gardens in it, and I'm going to grab the yellowish green we made, the 10, 0, 40, 0. Okay, I'm happy with that. Another way to apply a color to something is I'm just going to click in my pasteboard so that way nothing is selected, and I'm going to grab this pink color, and I'm going to drag it down to the 75, and you can see that it applies that swatch to this frame that we just selected. Go ahead and click in your pasteboard, make sure you don't have anything selected. Next, what we want to change is the Orchid Clinic. So go ahead and select that. Make sure you actually click on the word here, if you click in the space between it where that frame is, it's not going to color it the way we want it to. So make sure you click on where the actual lettering is, so where the black is. That's just the way this particular asset is set up. It was set up as a normal type frame, and then they translated it into outlines. You can do that with any type you make by going to type and create outlines. So that's sometimes a workaround you can use if you don't want to worry about fonts. You can just translate it to an outline, but then you can't edit it any further. But so make sure you have the Orchid Clinic selected, and we're going to change that to that blue color we made. Now if you do this, and when you select the blue it fills in that back frame, just undo it and click on where the actual black of the lettering is. And when you do that, you should notice that the frame stretches to encompass all of it instead of that smaller frame that only goes to like the top of a little bit above the O and C. So if you've clicked on the actual black part of the lettering, and then if you go to hit that blue color, it should change the fill of it. And again, just make sure that that solid square is on top when you do it. Next up is I'm going to click out here again, and we're going to work on applying colors to strokes, which is that square right there, or if you're looking in your control panel, it's the bottom one. It's the square with the little hole in it. So I'm going to select this line down here. It's the dark green line. Then you can either change the color of the stroke by going up to your control panel and selecting it here, or you can go over into your swatches panel. Just make sure that the swatch square is on top. And then we want to select that pink color we used, which is the 257500. Again, just make sure that you're changing the stroke and not the fill on this. Alright, so next thing I want to change is I'm going to go down to where this orchid is, the one with the black background. I'm going to select that, and I want to change that stroke to the pink color as well. And I want to change that to the blue color we have, so the 90, 70, 30, 10. Alright, next up is we are going to change the color of text now. So the way you would change the color of a font is you just use your type tool, put the cursor into that text frame, and then select everything you want to change. And I'm going to go up into the control panel, and I'm going to go to my fill. And I'm going to change that to the blue we made. And then I'm going to go down to grow, maintain, rebloom. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to change the fill to the 90, 70, 30, which is our blue still. And then I'm going to go over to Urban Oasis Gardens. And I'm going to use our Pantone color for that. Alright, next is I want to go to 75. Well, $75, and I'm going to select all of it, and then I'm going to go to my properties window. So if you go to Window, Properties, I want to add a stroke to it, so I'm just going to go right here, and I'm just going to put in 1 point for the stroke. That's going to control the weight of it. And then for the stroke, you can actually just click on that square there. And I want the stroke to be that blue, and I'm going to change the fill to that 65-25. And then if I get rid of the highlight, it should look like that. Alright, so I'm just going to close that, and I'm going to deselect everything. Next up is we're going to create a tint swatch. So I'm going to select this pink color, And again, if you have nothing selected, nothing should really change. We just want to select that pink color. And then I'm going to go up to the menu button up here, and I'm going to create a new tint swatch. Okay, and everything should be grayed out except the tint down here. I'm going to change that to 65. And if I hit OK, it'll add the new swatch to the bottom here. The reason you might want to do that is you're going to be using the solid normal color a lot, but there are also assets that you want to color, so you're going to be using the same tint of that color as well. You're going to be using that over and over. It's quicker to just make a new tint swatch, so that way you don't have to go, okay, select, change the color, change the tint. You can just select and then grab the swatch with the appropriate tint on it. So we're going to go back down to where it has the $75. We're going to select that frame and make sure you have the fill selected, so it'll be that solid square there. And we want to set that to that new tint swatch we just made. Next up is working with gradients. So I'm just going to click in my pasteboard here, make sure I have nothing selected. And I'm going to go back into my swatches panel. And I'm going to hit that menu button, and I want to create a new gradient swatch. And it should bring up this menu. I'm going to go ahead and name it pink/yellow. And I want it set to linear. But I'm going to grab this first stopper there, and up where it says stop color, I'm going to change that to swatches. And the first one I want to grab is that dark pink color, so it's the pink without the tint on it. The 257500. And I want to set the location to 5%. That's the location on the bar here. And then I'm going to select this second stopper, and that one's going to be set to the really light yellow we made, the 10040. And that location needs to be set at 70. And I just hit enter, and you'll see it adds that gradient at the end of the list here. So I'm going to grab this that has grow, maintain, and rebloom, and I'm going to have the fill selected, and I'm going to change the fill to that pink yellow gradient we made. Now once you have selected the gradient you want, and you have applied it to the shape, you aren't just stuck with it. You can change how it fits onto the frame and which direction it's going. So I'm going to grab my gradient swatch tool. You can just press G on your keyboard, or if you look to the left here, it should be that tool right under the rotate tool. But again, you can just hit G on your keyboard. This is the solid pink, this is the solid yellow, and the actual transition between the two isn't very wide. So I just want to spread that transition out, so that way the edges are a little bit softer. And I also want to change it from going left to right to up and down. So I'm going to click like maybe at the stroke there. And I'm going to hold shift on my keyboard. That way I know I'm going directly straight and I'm not throwing it off at an edge by a little bit. And I'm going to go down to about there. This isn't an exact science. I'm going to try that one more time. There we go. I kind of like how that looks, so I think I'll leave it like that. Next is I'm just going to deselect everything, and I want to work with a color group. So a color group is an easy way to organize a color palette that you may be using repeatedly. So if you're using something that has like a brand identity and they want you to use these specific colors, you can put them all in a color group, and you can actually share that color group between different documents. So it helps, one, organize your swatches over here, and also it makes it easier to transfer it to other documents if you need to. So I'm just going to go back up into my swatches panel and click that menu button, and I want to make a new color group. I'm going to name this Orchid Clinic add. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll see it made a folder with that gradient we have. So I want to actually add all of these colors that we made. So I want to add everything from green dark to that 2575 00 65% tint. So I'm going to grab the green dark and I'm going to go all the way to this tint swatch. I'm going to hold shift and then click on the last one and it should select all of those. And then I can just click and drag and you'll see that bold line that appears. I would just want that bold line to be underneath the folder, and if I let go, all of my colors have been added to that folder. So now I'm happy with the document. I can just go ahead and save it, and I can throw it into presentation mode to get a look and see what the finished product looks like. Alright, you don't have to do this next part, but another handy tool InDesign has is the color theme tool. This is handy if you want to design a color palette around a specific image. So let's say I want to design my color palette for this around this orchid bud here. I can grab my color theme tool, which if I go to my eyedropper and right click, and then I'm just going to click in this image here, and you'll see it gives me 5 colors that are extracted from this image. And if I click on this little arrow here, you can see that it gives me some different varieties. So there's one where it has a lighter pink and a darker purple, and then we've got the blue, the black, the green, and then you've got one where there's 2 really dark colors, and you've got kind of like a lighter palette down here. So if I wanted to use any of these color palettes, I would just select the one I want to use, and I can either add this theme to my library, which if you have an Adobe subscription, that basically it just means it saves it to a cloud, and you can go, so I can go to, once I have it saved, I can go to CC libraries, and I'll bring up this panel, and everything you have saved to your account, whether it's color themes or some images, it'll have it installed. So like here are some graphics that I have added to my library because I was working between Illustrator and Photoshop. And then there's a bunch of color themes that I've used in the past. So that's what adding it to your library means. Or you can just hit this button and it will add the theme to your swatches. So you can see I clicked that button and it added the colorful theme to my swatches there. So that can come in handy if you just want to pick up a color palette real quick. So go ahead and just turn this in and you can move on to the next project.